I'm the chair of the independent inquiry into the Sheffield street tree dispute. Thanks for joining us again. Could you please tell us your name and your role?
Thank you, Mark. I'm Kate Josephs and I'm the Chief Executive of Sheffield City Council.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for coming today. A couple of process points, and then one other thing I want to say before we start. This is being live streamed, as you know, and will be recorded and then made available. You're aware of that, you're comfortable with that. We also, as you know, have to be careful not inadvertently to say anything that's libelous or defamatory or brings into the public domain some private information about people which ought to be respected. I'm sure we're not going to run into problems with that, but were we to, I would let you know, and we'd have to fix the problem, otherwise we couldn't continue with the hearing. Now, I just wanted to start by asking you if you wouldn't mind, please, passing on something to some of your colleagues. I have asked for a huge amount of documentation and material, and I know that it's not always been easy for your colleagues to find it all, and I know people have worked incredibly hard to put material together, and I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind passing on my personal thanks to them, because it would have been impossible for us to carry out the work of the inquiry without that. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask you to pass that on, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mark. I'll be really happy to pass that on.
So we have a list of topics, but let me give you a chance to say anything you'd like to say first by way of introductory comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Firstly, I'll say the same to you and to all of your team, really, just how grateful I am to you, to the team and to everybody who's given their time to participate in the inquiry. We'll go on to discuss this, but I do believe, and I've always believed, that this inquiry is a really critical step in enabling us to move forward as a council and as a city. I would like to make two overarching comments before we go into your questions, if I may. Firstly, as you know, earlier this year I was asked to take a leave of absence while the council investigated actions linked to my attendance at a gathering in my former employment during a period of COVID restrictions. That event should not have happened, and I've apologised unreservedly for my involvement and for the hurt it's caused to some people. I made an error of judgment in not speaking to council colleagues about the event and Cabinet Office investigations into it sooner, and received a written warning in respect to this. Having asked for guidance from my former employer, I chose to follow it and keep confidential the fact of the event I attended. I've apologised and acknowledged that this was a mistake and I should have pushed back harder. There remain a lot of things about this situation that I am really sorry for, but one of those is that my actions have, for some people, affected their confidence in my commitment to the Nolan principles of public life, to transparency, openness and honesty. Obviously, what I am committed to doing now is to continuing to do my best to demonstrate a really firm commitment to showing through my actions my commitment to those principles, to the Nolan principles. They matter to me hugely, and they matter to SCC very much indeed. I know that might seem a bit of a tangent, but in the context of our discussion and the inquiry and some of the things that have been commented upon, I feel it's really important that I don't give the impression to anybody interested in this inquiry that I'm dodging this issue, this personal issue, recognising that, you know, I was certainly brought up to believe that what matters when you make a mistake or when you hurt someone or when you fail to meet the highest of standards, that you own that, you don't try to hide away from it, and most importantly that you learn from it. Which brings me on to my second overarching point that I want to make, and here I'm very pleased to be reiterating what the leader of the council, Councillor Terry Fox, said to you earlier today. So yes, as leader and chief executive, Terry and I see ourselves as the custodians of this organisation. It's obviously not a responsibility we hold alone. Sheffield's 84 elected members, all of our staff, I think, are really proud to hold a responsibility to uphold the values and standards and behaviours that we set for ourselves. And we do strive to do our best every day to ensure best value for all the tax rate and rent payers' money that we have stewardship of. However, Terry and I have discussed, and as Terry said, the book does ultimately, rightly, stop with Terry and me when it comes to setting the tone and the culture of the organisation. So although I wasn't here at the time of the street tree dispute, I am here now, and it's really important to me, it's vital to me that we as an organisation are an organisation that takes responsibility. Your inquiry will and should be the final and authoritative word on the detail of what happened in relation to the street tree dispute, and I don't want to preempt or prejudge anything that you say, your findings, or make any assumptions about what you will say about the role of the council. But it is clear to me, having listened to almost every hearing thus far, I'm afraid I haven't been able to listen to all of the ones today, but every other one, that this organisation bears some responsibility for what happened and could have done more to really listen and engage with all residents, and that did have consequences for individual citizens, for colleagues and for the reputation of our city. So before we get into questions, I would like on behalf of Sheffield City Council to say sorry and to acknowledge that I expect to repeat that apology when we receive your final report. It's really important, if we're to find a way forward, to rebuild trust with the communities we serve, to look forward for our city with ambition and not back with rancour, that we have to be capable of acknowledging and accepting and apologising when we get things wrong, and then demonstrating our genuine determination to learn and improve.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm sure everyone will have listened to all of that very carefully, and I appreciate the fact that you've made the statement you've made. Thank you. You sort of alluded, Kate, to the first thing I wanted to ask you, actually, but let me ask you more explicitly and directly why you thought it was important for the Council to establish the inquiry.
I think, I was appointed Chief Exec in August 2020, took up my post January 2021, and although it's the case that I grew up in the area, I often spent time in Sheffield for work in the years of the dispute. I have to be completely honest and say that the events around the dispute were not something I've been particularly aware of until I took up post. But it was, however, really clear very quickly when I took up post just how big an issue this had been for the council and the city, and how it was hanging around as an issue. It wasn't. There was a lot of unresolved feelings and a lot of unresolved anger, and when we were sort of sitting having conversations as colleagues about, how do we, with partners, take the city forward, achieve what the city has the potential to do, be the best council we can, it felt like a drag on that. And so I think it was really important that we found a way to support the recovery and healing in Sheffield from the dispute, to draw some conclusions in an objective and dispassionate way, which is where it's so important to have an independent inquiry such as this, with someone as eminent as yourself leading it, and also be really clear about the things we need to do and the recommendations we need to take forward to help minimise the risk of such a dispute re-emerging, but also make sure we glean appropriate learning. So it's that focus on truth and reconciliation that was important for me. It's about us demonstrating that openness and honesty is a core value for the council and will continue to be, and also I think it's because we do need to find a way to move on, and the future needs to be what is defining what we do for Sheffield. So that was what my motivation was.
Great, thank you. And I suppose the follow-on is just to give you a chance to let me know if there's any issues that you particularly want the inquiry to look at, obviously within the scope of our terms of reference, but bearing in mind that you've listened to quite a lot of what other people have said to me. So listening to what other people have said to you gives me some reassurance that you are certainly asking questions around this space. But I'll just set out a few key points that are covered broadly in the terms of reference, but I think it is important for us to understand. So obviously understanding the context, including the situation of Sheffield's highways payments and street trees around 2008 and 10. So understanding why SCC made the decision to use a PFI scheme and what the options that we'd had, why we appointed Amy, and the terms of that contract, how we implemented the contract in particular around tree felling, opposition to the implementation of the contract and the emergence of the dispute. So I think just getting a clear objective view of, as far as possible on the facts of all those points. I think, and this has obviously been an area that you've probed quite a lot, understanding how the council, Amy and others responded as the dispute progressed, and in particular the period between 2016 and 2018 in which it escalated and then de-escalated, and understanding what we can learn from that. I think understanding the impact of the Streets Ahead programme is very important, as how that's developed and how, and we'll go on to talk about the Street Tree Partnership, but what opportunities there are and potentially what challenges you've identified. And then I think how to achieve closure as far as is possible, and I don't underestimate how
hard that will be with individuals that feel aggrieved from the dispute. On a personal level, I would be really interested where you feel it appropriate in any observations or reflections you have on the organisational culture, governance and decision making in Sheffield City Council during that period. There have been a number of changes over the last year, as you know, most importantly the move to a committee system of governance. We've also got a number of new senior appointments and the new senior officer structure. We've also got, really importantly, new employee-developed organisational values, which are designed to guide everything we do. But I think we know we're on an improvement journey as a council. And I think having the time to reflect on your feedback and reflections will be really timely in that. Alongside, I think you're aware, we've recently had an LJ corporate peer review for the first time, which will be published in the spring. So the reflections around culture, governance and decision making, I think, will just be very timely in our thinking about the future.
Okay. You've given us quite an agenda there, actually, but we will do our best to discharge all of that.
I'm confident you're already covering all of these things based on my watching.
You'll get a chance to. You'll find out before too long, as you know. Now, you said context is important, so I want to ask you. My next question is about the current context and the main challenges the council currently faces, which are, I think, relevant to the last items in the terms of reference we have. Yeah, absolutely. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to say here, and I am going to get into, I'm going to talk through the biggest challenges we're facing as a city and a council, because those things are inextricably linked in lots of ways. But I do want to start by just making the point that for every challenge there are opportunities. I'm a glass half full person, and I think we've got to, as a city, we've got some incredible assets. So I kind of wanted to start by just reflecting on that a little bit, because otherwise I worry that there will just be a very long and depressing list of challenges that we're facing. So, we're the fourth biggest city in England, we've got a huge population, we're growing, we are increasingly diverse, we're the greenest city in the UK, we have incredible environmental, cultural, sporting, industrial assets, and really exciting opportunities around our economy in terms of advanced manufacturing, digital, academic research. I think the biggest asset we have as a place is our people. I hope while you've been up here you've been able to see some of that. We're a caring, friendly and warm place because of the people we have here in the city. And we have a really vibrant volunteering community and faith sector, and very many engaged, active, creative, ingenious citizens and communities who care deeply about the city. So I think one of the things that's both an opportunity and it's a challenge because it requires us to work in different new ways is how we play a role as a council with partners and citizens to develop an ambitious future-focused vision for the city, an ethos of sort of Team Sheffield ethos, and try to build together some shared ambitions and a sense of inclusive growth for the city. I say all of that because I think it is important to root this inquiry in the future as much as it is to talk about the challenges. But yes, there are some significant challenges. So the things that I suppose I would say I reflect upon most frequently and most deeply when I think about the challenges we face as a city first off and then as a council. So as a city, inequality is a real challenge. It runs very deep in Sheffield. It's very long-standing. It is a very unequal city. Almost a quarter of the population live in areas that are in the 10% most deprived nationally. Too many Sheffielders are excluded from opportunities, and the life chances and life experiences diverge within the city between people and place. And obviously the cost of living crisis is adding to this, and the services we deliver are incredibly important to support those communities through that. Economic productivity, while I mentioned we've got some real assets, we have very low economic productivity as a city and as a region. We're certainly not where we should be in terms of job skills and business growth, and that contributes to outcomes in health and well-being. It entrenches inequality, and it is exacerbated by incredibly tough national and global economic headwinds. That's
unequivocally the case. We are facing a climate emergency, like the world is facing a climate emergency, and while I see huge opportunities to respond with creativity and ambition, there is a real challenge for us to do that in a way that's just and inclusive and in partnership with our communities, particularly recognising some of those entrenched inequalities in the city. And then finally, as a city, and this applies to the council, but it applies to all public services and particularly the voluntary sector, the legacy of austerity, the intensive response to COVID-19 and ongoing increasing demand for children's and adult social services has placed immense pressure on outcomes and requires, it can feel like we're in a period of sort of permanent stabilisation. As a council, we have managed cuts of £475 million since 2010, and while we have done a really a good job of protecting core services to our most vulnerable residents, there is no way that you can take that scale of funding out of an organisation and not see consequences for wider services. We know that we are at a point as a council where we have got to we've got to get in place a really clear corporate plan. We've got to get coherent, priority-based budgeting, and we are going to have to continue to transform going forward. Because as you know, referencing the macroeconomic and public spending position, fiscal position, we can't expect that our funding situation is going to change enormously very soon. I mentioned and have alluded to this, we have got work to do to renew and redefine relationships with our residents and partners. We know in some cases we need to rebuild trust and confidence and collaboration, and a number of colleagues who have spoken and partners who've spoken to you have talked about the council doing with and not doing to, and those are sort of easy words to say, but it's not easy to shift the culture of an organisation of the size of the council into that sort of mindset. We have received some really hard messages from citizens, members, elected members, staff and partners who've told us that we haven't had a clear enough set of priorities, that we have an inconsistent and variable culture across our organisation, that we don't reflect or sufficiently respect the diversity of the city, and some rightly hard messages in our recent City Race Equality Commission on that. We know, as I mentioned, that some citizens haven't felt sufficiently involved, and on an operational point of view, we've lacked consistent, a strong enough performance culture, I would argue, particularly in core services for citizens. So some big challenges, and I think the important thing is that we know and recognise that they are there, and we recognise we need to be on a journey. I haven't talked about the model of committee governance, which I think is obviously a big change for the organisation. It's one that we're committed to making work. It is going to take time to embed and iterate and learn and to strengthen our understanding and some of the culture and behaviours that support the effective operation of that. And we've also, Terry I think mentioned earlier, the local area committees, which are a really great start, and we know there's far more to do to build on the local area committees to ensure that we're really empowering our communities. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but I do think that we have to acknowledge some real strengths across many of our services, and we've set out a delivery plan and improvement journey which were published in August. We've got clear commitments to embed a robust performance culture and tackle underperformance, and we've got some real bright spots, from children's social care to environmental quality, to work attracting significant government investment through levelling up, the work we do to support asylum seekers and refugees in the city. I could go on and on. We've got some really great pockets of activity across all of our services, and incredibly passionate staff, 8,000 staff who love the city and want to make a difference, and I don't think there's a better foundation to build upon. So it's quite a long-winded answer to a question, what might seem a straightforward question, but I think it's important to recognise that the context in which we're working as a council is undeniably challenging, and it's the same for local authorities all over the country. B, we know we've got a journey to go on in terms of performance improvement as a council, but also that we're not, that we must get better at celebrating where we have strengths and where we have bright spots and where we have those cultural, where the culture is really positive, and build and grow from that.
Okay. No, look, the reason I asked the question is because I think the context is important as well, and understanding your assessment of it is that was an extremely helpful answer. Thank you. Now, within that context, fits the question of the highway infrastructure of the city and the programme, and so I wanted to ask you your assessment of the current situation of the network, but also of implementing the Streets Ahead contract.
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, just in terms of sort of taking your last part of the question first, I am confident that we have a good grip on Amy's performance and implementation. We have open, robust relationships at all levels with very clear escalation from operational through to strategic through to chief officer level, and I do feel that that allows for appropriate levels of challenge and support, certainly from what I have seen since I've arrived. As Councillor Otten mentioned earlier, there's clear oversight by the Waste and Street Scene Committee, and I know later this month they're taking a report on Amy performance, which I think Councillor Otten will have mentioned, and senior leaders from Amy will attend that. So the culture around recognising this is a long-term partnership around support, around challenge, scrutiny, performance management, and escalation feels to me to be relatively healthy. We know there are areas for improvement, and again, Councillor Otten mentioned some of those, but the corporate delivery plan, which I talked about earlier, that was published in August, identified in particular that we know that resident satisfaction with the roads is no longer improving. That has been an improving performance metric for us as a city, and that's sort of stagnating now. And there are some specific challenges around service standards around the city. We also know from all of our community engagement through the local area committees that highways, the environment of neighbourhoods, cleanliness, safe roads and effective transportation and public transportation are priorities almost consistently across the whole city. So I mentioned that I feel like we have clear routes to address challenges. I think there are also some real questions for me about how we can sort of seek to leverage the partnership and the contract to seize opportunities for improvement, including, I hope, increasingly capitalising on new and developing technologies. But I think, my overall assessment is that it is, we're managing the partnership and contract well, that I feel confident that we have good open relationships with Amy at all levels, and where we're clear where there are challenges and there are areas where performance improvement is needed, and I think that they would be recognised equally by Amy because there's that clear communication. So that's how I'd say in terms of the overall contract. On street trees, I think there's no doubt, and again we can talk about the street tree partnership, I'm sure. I think we are obviously in a better place than we were a few years ago. I think that's undeniable. The street tree partnership is nationally recognised. We've got a clear street tree strategy, which many point to as an exemplar. But as you've heard, again, talking to partners who've come to the inquiry, there's always going to be work to do. The need to keep working at it together is not ever going to go away. So I think how we manage and support the partnership, how we manage any areas of disagreement in a productive way, I think is really important. So we can get to a place where parties can challenge each other and find compromises where needed. Okay.
Let me just ask you, you've started to talk about the partnership there. Let me just ask you one thing that I discussed a bit with Councillor Fox and Councillor Otten, which picks up something that Nathan Edwards, the chair of the partnership, said to me, which is a question about resourcing of the partnership, Amy resourcing of the partnership, is part of that, but also council staff support, but also council senior rhetorical, political, practical support.
Yeah. So there's a number of elements in that. I mean, I think so. The street tree strategy, I was really pleased last year when it was launched to be able to be there at the launch. We have good officers who you've heard talked about in positive terms, rightly, working on the partnership. it is the case, referencing my earlier points, that we are facing incredibly challenging times from a budgetary point of view. So our ability to identify and allocate huge amounts of council resource to, frankly, to many things is really constrained. Now, that isn't to say that the answer to every question of, do we need to put more resource there is no, because there isn't any. We have to be more nuanced than that. We have to understand our priorities, and we have to, if we see risks or issues, ensure that we put the right support in there. I'm aware, I'm aware that the team can see that there may well be challenges at certain points of demands for more support, and I think what we just need to do is really keep an eye on how that progresses. I think Councillor Otten mentioned that he'd been to meetings of the Street Tree Partnership. I would be very happy if ever, I'm always happy to participate, equally conscious that it's not always appropriate for the way you show the way you show engagement and support for anything in the council as a senior officer doesn't have to be turning up to it and sticking your oar in. Sometimes that's not the most helpful thing. Yeah. But I think everybody knows, and certainly the way that I operate is that if anyone has any concerns, questions, or bits of feedback they want to give, my door genuinely is open, and I think anybody who's ever sent me an email about anything, frankly, in the city would know that. So I hope we can just keep a good eye on how the work's going, keep those the dialogue open, and if there's areas where resource feels to be becoming constrained, that we try to find solutions collectively. And certainly if there's a question about Amy participating, or if that needs to be escalated and raised, then I'd be very happy to do that with the senior leadership at Amy.
Very good, thank you. Now, I asked the leader of the council to just explain to me what I've heard from various sources about his vision for how the citizens of the city are engaged in the life and decisions made about the city. And I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about that as well, including, if you want to, drawing in, what you've heard from leaders of the other parties on that point.
Well, yes, as you say, you'll have heard Terry talk passionately about this earlier. It's something that Terry and I talk a lot about and share a real vision on, and I think it links very importantly to how we see the organisation and its culture needing to develop based on a foundation which is really strong in some places. I don't want to give the impression that this is a universal challenge. I think we've got some incredible teams working really wonderfully in partnership with residents. You asked about other parties. I think it's clear that across parties, the leadership of all parties agree that it really matters that the council engages. Certainly when I was appointed, it was one of the most consistent bits of feedback I was given by members. And that was a sort of sense that, we need to get out of the town hall sometimes. We need to be open to listen. We need to not always jump to the answer until we've heard from and reflected with residents. And we need to be, open to the fact that some of the conversations we need to have might be quite messy and circular, because that's what happens when you listen to people with lots of different views. At the same time, we also want to move the city forward and move the council forward, so we need to be really open and transparent around the choices and decisions that are being made and the advice that's being given. I think I keep referring to the corporate delivery plan, but that was signed off by the Cross-Party Strategy and Resources Committee of the council, and it gives real primacy to this, these matters. So, as a matter of record, I think that's there as well. I guess what I'd say, what would I bring out? I mean, we recognise in there, and this is, informed, for example, by the findings of the Race Equality Commission, by work that we've undertaken with Involve, and we know that communities don't feel fair, they don't feel inclusive or empowered, and we know that not everyone in the city feels included, and particularly we understand that there are very stark differences in outcomes for people who live in different parts of the city, as I've mentioned earlier, come from different backgrounds or who share different protected characteristics, such as being disabled. So we know that matters on almost every indicator imaginable, and we know that holds the city back and means that not everybody is able to fulfil their potential. So we also recognise that the task of tackling that challenge is one that we will only do together with others. It's not something that this council, or indeed any council or any single public sector organisation can do alone. We also therefore know it's really important that a diverse range of voices are heard by those in positions of power. So lots of thinking has gone on. I think I know there is still a lot of work to do, and recognise there's still a lot of work to do, and we think about active participation in decision making, models of engagement, models of co-production. We need to be willing to experiment. We need to be able to try things and sometimes get them wrong, but learn from them. And really, we know that the job here is to move away from participation in sort of formal decision making and into upstream engagement, where anyone who wants to play an active role in their communities or who has lived experience that is important and relevant has the support, capability and opportunity to do so. What we're doing this year on this is really focusing on the groundwork we need for empowered communities. So we will not transform to that sort of perfect vision quickly. It's going to take work and sustained effort, but fully embedding our local area committees, which I'm sure Terry spoke about, which we set up last year, supporting those committees to deliver on their plans, on the community plans that have been set, trying to reset decision making, building relationships with the voluntary community and faith sectors, and finding opportunities to develop jointly with them how we work together, and particularly in the context of the current financial budgetary challenges, providing recognising that sustainability and predictability of funding is really important, recognising that creating a solid foundation on which to build relationships is really important, and that is something that we can do. We are going to continue to work to develop approaches to community involvement, including using digital tools more. And I think we are going to need to rethink how some of our services operate, and that's a piece of work we need to start. So I think I'm not going to make any apology for the fact that we've made a start, and anyone who many people will be able to note that isn't perfect, but I think it's a really important start, and it's a very big shift. And the leadership of our elected members has been really consistent and determined, rightly, and very inspiring in terms of how far they want to push in terms of engaging with communities, and I guess seeing Sheffield City Council as an organisation that doesn't just do from within the confines of this town hall building, but is out in our communities working with.
Okay, thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you if you could update me on the ongoing work the Council's doing on freedom of information, subject access requests, and also dealing with complaints, including some outstanding complaints related to the dispute. And anything you'd like to tell me about the steps the Council is now taking to resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, very happy to. So, it is clearly the case that the Council has spent and continues to use significant resources responding to queries relating to our approach to the dispute. I want to take a moment to pay tribute to our committed, expert, professional colleagues in our small information management team. They work really, really hard, and they are incredibly committed to their duties and their legal duties, and they have deep expertise. It is a small team. It's a challenge that we and all of the local authorities face, but they do work really, really hard to ensure compliance with data protection and information rights law. They advise, they promote, they consult, they audit, and they do their best to ensure compliance across a council of 8,000 people. I think we talked about context earlier, and we know that every public body is in a very challenging climate when it comes to FOI and SARS EIA requests. I was aware of the Information Commissioner, John Edwards, only a few weeks ago, said, and I quote, I will read this out, "The FOI caseload is stretched to breaking point right across the public sector. We had large backlogs and people were waiting months for responses to their requests, which was not good enough. Limited funding, an increase in FOI cases and an increased need to support stretched public authorities during the COVID pandemic created a perfect storm." And that is a picture that I think I recognise, that my team would recognise, in the information team would recognise. So yes, we have had a significant backlog of FOI and SAR requests, and compliance rates are still recovering from the pandemic. Relating to the street tree dispute, we have 10 outstanding FOI requests and complaints and 1 outstanding SAR. We have made clearing the pandemic backlog an urgent performance challenge in our corporate delivery plan. We intend to return to a steady state by the end of March 2023, which requires us to clear our backlogs and comply with 95% of deadlines. We're employing additional staff, we're continuing to utilise technology, and we are reviewing all of our business processes. Our senior officers monitor performance, and our elected members scrutinise and challenge officer reports. I think the publication of information in the Sheffield Tree Archive of all of our files relating to the street tree management between 2013 and 2018 is a really important part of this. It's the same team doing lots of that work. More than 15,000 pages are being published in stages by City Archives and Local Studies Service. On a kind of personal level, since becoming Chief Exec, I have done my utmost to demonstrate personal commitment to the importance of our legal duties as a public body. I've dedicated weekly all-staff messages to FOI compliance and deadlines, which I haven't checked my approval ratings for those messages, but frankly I don't care. I've made FOI and SAR performance a corporate performance matter, commissioned briefings and updates for the strategic leadership team, and I've ensured budgets allocated to support that team, and personally have followed up with requesters who've contacted me directly about delays. I could go into a bit more detail if you want about some of the broader aspects of work that we have done around information management, if that's helpful now. Do you want me to talk about that?
It's up to you. I mean, I completely recognise the picture you paint of small numbers of very hard-working, very expert people basically being drowned in huge numbers of hard-to-handle issues. Yeah. I recognise that. And you've been clear in setting out your game plan for dealing with that. Yeah. So you've addressed the main thing I was driving at. But if you want to say anything else, I'd be certainly happy to listen.
I suppose the overarching point I'd make, which I make kind of over and over again with all staff, is that information management and compliance with our duties is everybody's job. And this perhaps speaks to one of the aspects of the culture of the organisation. When I talked about a performance culture earlier, I didn't only mean how we're effectively using data and evidence around services to drive continuous improvement. I also meant an understanding and recognition of the corporate aspects of our responsibilities, whether that's around FOI and information management and data handling, whether it's around health and safety, whether it's around our duties in terms of safeguarding. There are a number of really, really important responsibilities that as a public organisation we hold, and it's very our public sector equality duties, and it's really important that managers at all levels through the organisation understand that it is their responsibility to lead that work. And I think that's the sort of cultural shift that we want to make, that we don't see the responsibility or the accountability as being with the small team of experts. They are there to essentially be the guardians of the framework and drive things forward, but they need the whole organisation supporting them. And I think and therefore it's really important that I and other senior officers are driving that message through and are holding ourselves and our managers to account for their performance in relation to this. So I'd say that, and then I suppose I'd just say in terms of management and storage of information, which is also a challenge in the public sector, I do think we've made huge improvements here. One of the challenges, obviously, with relation to the street tree dispute is that some of the information that is relevant is rather old and is in systems or relates to systems that have been improved and upgraded. We have over 500 services, we serve close to 600,000 residents, and the management information is challenging in that context. Doesn't mean it's not. That's not a cop-out, it's just making that point. And I think we have about 400 software applications. We hold 1 billion documents, and that doesn't include emails or customer records in large case management systems. So there's a lot of work we need to do around how we handle our information and making sure that we have those really good information handling skills, and recognising that information governance and management is everybody's business. Just some specifics. We've adopted a ticketing system to track FOI and subject access requests, and a management dashboard now provides live updates of the status of requests. We have Microsoft Office 365 licenses for staff and members, which allow for structured storage, ability to locate documents more easily. Policies are now applied to each document as a matter of fact. So, as a kind of like real example, you cannot send an email now in the council without attaching a sensitivity flag to it, right. And those flags are explained and they can't be misused, and that allows for obviously easier retrieval, retention, clarity around archiving, storage, etc. We've developed a programme of Microsoft champions who are members of staff all across the organisation who understand how this works and the opportunities and the way that we can use the system to improve data handling. We've got an open data website now which allows for transparency of council data and FOI requests. We've developed a corporate retention schedule to ensure correct labelling of data, and lots of work is in progress on our data architecture, which obviously can be harder and longer to fix around IT systems, but that's a huge priority. So I think. Do I feel confident that we're doing everything we can within our budget and constraints to improve the systems and the processes and the infrastructure that supports effective storage of information and information management? Yes. I also think, though, that it's very important that we are constantly focused on staff, on training, on education, and on clarity of accountabilities for all staff.
Okay, thank you. Now, you weren't here during the dispute. On the other hand, you've inherited some things which were caused by or generated by the dispute in respect to what I wanted to ask you next. And the question really is whether there's anything you'd like to tell me about what you've observed or have heard about the personal impact of the dispute on staff in the council, but also the issue of how well or otherwise the council dealt with that at the time and, if you like, subsequently.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking about this. I mean, I think the personal impact to staff, and including a number who've left the organisation, remains really quite significant. And you've heard during this process how that some staff were subject to personal verbal attacks and threats, including outside working hours and environment, and that's never okay. It's significant. It's incredibly distressing for any human being, and I say that without judgment on either side. I think we just need to acknowledge that there's some real significant personal impacts for many people. I feel that we now have a solid support system in place for staff, which can be accessed and scaled up. And I know and have been told that during the period of the time when the discussions were happening, that there was support offered to those staff who were under significant pressure. And similarly, we've offered support. We've offered similar support to any staff who've been affected by the fact of the street tree inquiry, and I guess that these issues being re-examined. And what we're offering is broadly similar to what was available to staff during the time the matter was live. So that's around our employee assistance programme, It's around supervision with the support of management and supervision, where wellbeing will be discussed. We have self-service psychological and therapeutic support available through the Employee Assistance Programme, opportunity to be referred to occupational health, counselling and more intensive therapies can be available, and in some cases, in rare cases, we can access medical alerts if we do have any serious concerns for someone's well-being. So I am told, again, I wasn't here, but during the period of the dispute and conflict, a number of staff accessed a combination of those services, as well as open offers to access additional support, pastoral support, and those services were also available to elected members and are available to elected members. Most recently, during the inquiry, Richard Eyre, who's the Director of Street Scene and Regulations, and Elise Senior Wadsworth, who's our Head of HR, have made offers of support to those taking part in the inquiry should there be anything needed. I might finish by coming back to culture though, and I think it's really important that as an employer we offer all the support mentioned above, mentioned in terms of specifics, but also create a culture where staff understand that wellbeing matters. It's not trivial, it's not irrelevant. We can only look after others and do a good job if we are supported to look after our own health and wellbeing. And I think that's a really important aspect of one of our employee values. And I mentioned that we've developed employee values, and these have come from our employees. They include openness and honesty are important to us. They include together we get things done, and they also include people are at the heart of what we do. And part of people at the heart of what we do is about saying that means that we look after each other and we look after ourselves. A lot has changed in workplaces even over the last decade, as I'm sure you'd recognise as much as I do. I think personally one of the most positive developments is that the environment for being honest and open about health and well-being, including about mental health, is much more is much clearer now. It feels like it's changed really quite fundamentally. So I wasn't here, and I can't comment on the culture before I arrived, but I know that some colleagues have described a historically macho culture in some areas of the council. And all I'd say is that I'm really proud that our staff have developed new values which I think will help to mitigate against such descriptions being the case in the future.
Okay, thank you. Now I was going to ask you about how you manage and store information in the council and ongoing work to improve information management. Actually, you've talked quite a lot about that already, but if there's nothing else you want to add there, I'll move on to
I don't think so.
Okay. So we're getting into the last set of issues now, and I've asked a number of people who were here at the time or who had direct knowledge, but you will have acquired a view from what you've learned since you came here on this about essentially the impact you think the dispute had on the city and the council and the lessons which have been learned. And I just to add something, I'm not just talking here about the difficult things, because I gave Andy Milner a chance first thing this morning to tell me about the benefit of having better streets and pavements and street lights and so on, which is highly relevant to some of the things you said at the beginning, not least the economic productivity. So I'm trying to ask you a broad question and give you a chance to say whatever you want to say about that.
Thank you. So in terms of the impact, and good prompt not just to focus on the negative. We do like doing that in Sheffield. So obviously I'm really aware that I moved back to the city in 2021. Although I grew up in the area, it was very different when I grew up here. And so I'm really aware that my impressions of the impact of the dispute are essentially second-hand and will be limited. People have shared their personal reflections with me, as you'd expect. I'll talk a bit about the negative impacts of the dispute, and then I'll have a think about some of the positive potential impacts or consequences. You've heard from many people that the dispute clearly damaged our reputation as a city, and it clearly damaged the trust that some citizens have in the council. And I've mentioned already that the sort of open wound of the dispute, my words, has had what I describe as a drag effect on our ability as a council and as a city to move forward positively and with ambition. And I think that's, that even to the extent that I think the positive and dedicated work that you've heard about around the Street Tree Partnership and, our status as a national, one of the greenest cities, our status as an internationally renowned city in terms of our tree stock and our outdoor city credentials. I think there's an element that there's a sort of sense that we always have to slightly apologise for that, or that there's a slight caveat to that because of what happened, which I think is a real shame, because one of the greatest assets we have as a city is our environment, and it is one of the most, if you ask anybody what they love about Sheffield, from many different walks of life, many different ages, many different ethnicities, one of the most common things you hear is, the fact that is the trees and the greenness and the fact that you can, almost from almost anywhere in the city, you have a great view and you can see some hills and you can see some, and I think that's our complete unique selling point. I don't think there are many cities in the country that have that, and so I think, yes, it's a positive that we have really put huge amounts of work now over recent years into that partnership, and I also think it's unfortunate that the fact of the dispute means that people feel constrained about proudly shouting about that work, because somebody will always pop up and say, but what about
right. Right.
So I think that is something that we've got to try to move on from, and I don't think it's a trivial. I don't think it's trivial. I think also on the positive side that I do feel like lessons have been learned around governance and escalation of issues within the council, and I've mentioned and talked a lot about the work it takes to build and maintain a healthy, open culture within a large organisation with appropriate support and challenge at all levels. I've talked a little bit about that. I think that is something that we are really aware of. It's something I've always been concerned about throughout my career, but I think that you've touched on it in some of your hearings, that sense of where is risk held, where are issues discussed, who is discussing, and what is the tone and nature of debate and discussion. I think we've learned a lot about openness and transparency and communication, and although I know there will be, and probably rightly so, people who are very sceptical about that based on their experience, I hope that what I've said around the work we are doing to get resources in and to invest in those areas and to drive up expectations goes some way to reassure that we have learned something about why it's important to be open and transparent, partly because that feeds into another lesson around engagement, and the recognition that we have a beautifully diverse city with lots of different communities and loads of people who, like I said earlier, really care and want to be involved, and we need to engage with those citizens as not in a sort of paternalistic, distant way, but as partners. So I think all of those lessons or themes are things that have come out of the learning. I don't think there's one right way to do those things. I think what the point is that we approach them as priority areas to develop. Beyond that, I think probably it's most appropriate for me and all of us who have a part to play in moving forward to wait to hear and reflect on your conclusions and recommendations before I say too much more, because I think you and the team have done a huge amount of really dedicated and incredibly thorough work, and I think a lot of what we've learned so far has perhaps missed something, in that we've missed that really objective view of what actually happened and what the key lessons need to be. So probably won't say very much more, because I think the main thing now is for us to hear what you have to say and learn from it.
Okay, fine. So I'm I was going to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to say, but I think there isn't on the basis of what you just said.
I don't think so. I think I'm just going to think whether I've said everything I wanted to say. I think I have.
Okay, thank you.
Other than thank you again.
Not at all, thank you. Okay, so that concludes the discussion I wanted to have with the Chief Executive. There's one more thing I want to say, though. The inquiry is now working on its report. It remains my intention, as I said when I published my terms of reference in March, that we will publish the report by March 2023. I expect that the report will contain a number of criticisms. When I published my terms of reference, I stressed the importance of providing a fair process for dealing with criticisms, and public inquiries have a way of doing that, and it's called maximalisation, and it basically is a system by which people writing reports flag to people they're considering criticising, or institutions they're considering criticising, in their conclusions, the intention to make some criticisms, and give those people a chance to respond before the report is finalised. And that's the process that we're going to follow for my inquiry. So I'm planning in the next week or so to put out a statement which will appear on the inquiry's site on the Council's website, which will describe and set a timetable for that process of maximalisation. So if you're watching this and you have an interest in that, I would encourage you, please, to look out for that statement, because it will set out how we intend to proceed. Thank you very much indeed, and at that point, I think, Charles, we can turn off the hearing.